Welcome back to the Modern Agency Real Estate Podcast, where we're going to bring you what's going on in the real estate market here in the Midwest as it is today. Now, I don't want to be that guy that's talking about interest rates like everybody else is, but since everybody else is talking about it, I might as well give people some facts on how they can get their interest rates lower, especially if they're first-time home buyers. So there is a lot of incentives out there for first-time home buyers. Getting a lower rate is one of them, utilizing an MHTC program. Benjamin, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Sure thing. So Missouri Housing Development Commission, MHDC, has a program called the First Place Program, and this is for first-time buyers who are either looking to receive down payment assistance or looking to receive a below-market interest rate. So there's two different programs. There's the First Place with down payment assistance. We use this pretty frequently with borrowers who are looking to save on down payment, reduce their cash to close. This allows a borrower to receive a 4% grant that actually gets tacked on as a second mortgage that's forgivable over a 10-year period. And in many cases, this 4% grant can cover the full down payment. So the client is just responsible for paying closing costs, or if it's negotiable from the seller's perspective, sellers can cover those closing costs as well. MHDC can cover the down payment. And a lot of times that first-time buyer can get in the door with pretty minimal cash out of pocket. So that's the MHDC First Place with down payment assistance. That program doesn't just come with the 4% grant. It also comes with an interest rate that's pretty substantially below market rate. So right now, and this is not a quote, but on conventional mortgages, MHDC with down payment assistance is pricing around 6%, whereas market rates are pricing around 7%. And on government loans, so FHA, it's pricing about 5 3/4 or 5.75, whereas national averages are pricing about 6.5. The other option here is the First Place without down payment assistance. So this is an option that allows a first-time buyer who has enough money for a down payment but still wants to reduce their interest rate to use all that incentive to essentially buy down their rate to a substantially below market levels. So First Place without down payment assistance right now is locking around 5.25% for conventional mortgages and around 5% for government mortgages. So we're talking about saving hundreds of dollars a month. And it's important to remember here, those rates, you lock them in for the 30-year mortgage. So that reduces the amount of times that a borrower has to refinance. So it doesn't only save them money now, but saves them money down the line, and gets them into a position where the housing payment is much more affordable.
And when you think about the way a loan is amortized, right? I mean, you're paying primarily interest on that loan over the first 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so the quicker you can get those 7 years over with is really helpful as well. And so refinancing can be great, but can also not be the best option as well if you've already got a desirable interest rate. So if you're putting less down and you're trying to get rid of your private mortgage insurance, you only get rid of your private mortgage insurance with that 20% equity. So you could do something called a recast opposed to a refinance to show the bank that you've got 20% equity in that house now and get rid of that private mortgage insurance. And that's going to take you away from having to restart that whole amortization schedule.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. So if a property, if you purchase a property with say 3 or 5% down, like a lot of first-time buyers do, but you want to get rid of your private mortgage insurance without having to refinance, you can do certain improvements to that property. They're going to increase the equity. Then you can, request an appraisal of the property. And if it's increased to a point where now that property is worth substantially more and your mortgage is only 80% of the property's value, then you can request from your lender that they remove the private mortgage insurance and reduce that monthly payment even lower without having to do a refi.
And even with, the way that we're seeing property value go up in St. Louis in general, with the, 3 to 6% appreciation, depending on the different neighborhoods, after 4 years, you can do a recast on that most of the time and get rid of that PMI, private mortgage insurance, without doing any updates to the house.
Right.
And so it's another great option. But if you're refinancing instead of doing a recast, you're going to restart that whole amortization schedule. And so if we can get you locked at an interest rate that's not going to come around, right? I mean, like you say, if we're
right. If we're talking about 5.25% interest rate, I'd love to say we're going to see that within 12 months, but I think we're kind of in the high 6s for a while now.
I don't
That's
think
kind
we're
of the
gonna
new
see
norm.
below 5 interest ever again.
Yeah, I mean, and if it were, if we were just to snap our fingers and create those sub 5% interest rates, it might feel great, but it's going to cause an explosion in home prices, and we're going to have an affordability option a problem in the other direction now, to where now it's not rates that are making a person's payment uncomfortably high. It's the purchase price that's making that payment
Yeah, so what's the
high.
real
So it's
issue?
kind of a double-edged sword.
Right.
The real issue is supply.
Yeah.
Right. We talk about that all the time. The real issue is supply. We're not building enough houses. There are more people that want to be homeowners than there are homes available.
Mm-hmm. Precisely. And so essentially what we're saying is if you can get a 5.25% rate with a first-time homebuyer program right now, you're likely not going to see that good of an interest rate ever again in your life unless you buy that rate down with actual cash.
Right. So essentially, the first place without down payment assistance uses actually government bonds to subsidize the buy down there, which is what allows a first time buyer to get a rate that's 1.75% below market rate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how would that affect the payment? Sitting on a $300,000 house.
I mean, a couple $100 a month at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A few $100 a month,
Yep.
a couple $100 a month. Which makes a big difference over the course of 5 years.
It does, right? And you talk about 30 years, that's the tens of thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes a huge
At
difference.
least.
And then once you get rid of that private mortgage insurance, your payment's going to drop another $120, $150 a month on top of that. And so there is ways to get that payment lower as a first-time home buyer. Or if you're not a first-time home buyer, you're not taking advantage of a first-time home buyer grant, we can use seller credits to purchase that rate buy down instead, getting you in that lower 5% range.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So even if that means that a buyer offers more for the property and then asks for additional money back to receive in a seller credit to use for a rate buy down, they might be paying a little bit higher of a top line purchase price. But since they're using seller credit to buy the rate down, their monthly payment is going to be lower than if they purchased at a lower price.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about, we pay a lot of attention to how much a house costs to purchase, but the real effect on the borrower or the client is how much it costs to own.
Mm-hmm. What's
which
that
is
monthly
determined
payment?
by the monthly payment.
Whenever I'm having a meeting with a buyer, first thing I ask him is not how much do you want to pay to buy a house, right? Do you want to buy a $300,000 house? Do you want to buy a $350,000 house? No. Hey man, what's going to make you comfortable?
What's a monthly payment that
What's going to make you comfortable on a monthly basis? Let's focus on that number, and then we'll go find a house that's going to fall inside of that. Now, a lot of the times that house might not be exactly what they're looking for, but they can, buy it, use it as leverage, scale up, get the next one.
Right. Your first house funds your dream house is what everybody says.
Exactly. Should you ever sell your first house? What's the with that?
I think you should hold on to that first house and make it a rental property. I'm biased towards that because I just did it, but I think it's a good idea, particularly if that first house would at least be cash flow neutral or cash flow positive to where you're covering that mortgage payment. You can hold on to that house, treat it like a piggy bank, put a tenant in there who's going to pay the mortgage off for you. And then, between principal pay down and equity appreciation, that's going to turn into an asset over time. That's going to fund future goals, future planning, retirement, whatever it may be. There's a lot to be said for holding on to a primary residence and converting into a rental property when you move rather than selling, just to go ahead and purchase another house.
Unless you're going to take those funds and use them for other investments, I don't necessarily recommend it. Now, if you really want to get into the real estate investment space and say you've got like $100,000 of equity in that house and you want to use that to go and buy a few more properties, then yeah, sell the house. I mean, reconsolidation of equity.
Right. Then you're accessing that equity to create more leverage so you can purchase different properties.
It's really all about leverage at the end of the day. If you can take an asset and go buy 4 more assets with the profit off of that sale, and it's actually going to help you scale at a faster rate and be better in the long run, then yeah, do that. But if you don't want to have a whole bunch of different rental properties and you just want to have, a couple here and there, which eventually if we're seeing a 5% appreciation in that area over a 30-year basis until that payment's, essentially entirely gone and now you're receiving positive cash flow plus 5% appreciation and the tax benefits that go along with that. There's so many different levers you can pull there as far as, profit ultimately when investing in real estate.
Right. Having a couple rental properties is a good way to diversify, even if you're somebody who takes a very traditional non-real estate based investment path. You're doing 401ks, brokerage accounts, stock, that's where the majority of your wealth is working for you. Having a couple rental properties, maybe that you collected over the years as primary residences when you initially obtained them and then held on to them after moving. That's a great way to diversify. Having 2 rental properties never going to be a bad thing, even if you are, somebody who doesn't treat real estate as their primary investment path.
Yeah, and I mean, people who have money in an IRA or a 401k or have savings, those routes, right, the more traditional investment route, if you want to get rental properties or buy land or something of that nature, and say you've got an IRA with $300,000 in it, $400,000 in it, your IRA can actually, depending on the IRA, the way it's structured, can actually purchase that asset with those funds that are inside of it, and the IRA becomes the owner of that asset, and you own the IRA, and you don't have to pull that money out and pay taxes on it, right? The IRA purchases it directly from those funds. IRA becomes the owner. You own the IRA, kind of like if you own a trust, in a way.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So there's ways to purchase real estate with the money you have in those more traditional accounts without seeing tax repercussions of pulling it out, ultimately.
Yes.
So there's strategic ways for everybody. Ultimately, it's just having that access to knowledge. Access to knowledge makes all the difference, and that's why educating yourself so thoroughly is probably the most important thing you could ever do.
Yeah. What are a couple resources that you use for education when it comes to investing in real estate?
Lots of money in business coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right. Lots of money in business coaching. I mean, I took a very kind of untraditional education route. Now, I've invested more in my education than anybody's probably spent on one college degree. Right? Or college degree and a master's degree.
More than I spent on college and master's degree.
Yeah. I mean, and I fully believe in investing in myself. If you don't invest in yourself and you want to get somewhere, how are you going to get there?
Right. Oh. So where do you think that came from? Was there somebody that you learned that from? Was it just through first coach that you hired and you saw firsthand the benefit of that? Where did your passion for learning and continuing education come from?
So I like to think about the most effective ways you can do anything, right? What's going to be the most effective route? Is it going to be going and sitting in a classroom with 30 other people who are asking questions you know the answer to? Or is it going directly to that source of information where you get personal one-on-one time on educating you in the areas where you want to be educated in, right? Because a lot of this information, you can get access to it through books, right? And so if you're just reading different books, you're going to be able to get most of this information that they're going to be teaching out of that. I want to know all the stuff that they're not putting in the books. Okay. What, is, and if they are putting it in the books, they probably make it really a lot more complicated than it actually is inside of that book. At least the way that I feel about it, the way that I receive information the best is in conversation and in teaching that's more on a one-on-one basis with an expert. Mm-hmm. Just like how I like to educate my clients one-on-one, right? We spend a lot of time on those buyer's consultations, on a listing consultation, on talking about the market in general and how this property is going to behave inside of that market and educating them on that, right? Now that's one-on-one time that I'm spending with them and teaching them throughout the process. And I like to receive that kind of back to myself when it comes to receiving information from different people who are experts in their fields. And so I've got a real estate coach who owns a lot of real estate. We'll put it that way. He owns a lot of real estate. So he's my investment coach. I've got a real estate coach who has been a mortgage broker for over 20 years. He owns a mortgage company. I've got a real estate coach that was the #1 real estate agent in the United States for years on years. And at the biggest brokerage in California, he was a top agent there for many years. And so different coaches, essentially, and really they're almost like professors in a way.
Right.
But they own their own businesses for business coaching. And really getting signed up with these guys is, you have to show a hunger, right? Ultimately. And if you're hiring a business coach that needs the money, you've hired the wrong business coach. Okay. I think that's kind of common sense.
Right.
When you pay attention, ultimately. And so if you can't afford the business coach to begin with, they don't really necessarily want to be coaching people that are already pushing in that direction. Okay. They want you to have a hunger to get there, or they know you're not going to pay attention in general. So.
Yeah. Well, they want to see that their investment of time and information is going to come to fruition in something as well, right? So they kind of pick their students carefully. Mm-hmm. We're headed to a conference this weekend through a mastermind group that you're a part of. That's going to be a cool opportunity. A lot of learning there that I'm looking forward to. But that's just another example of your investment in learning and growing and being a part of these groups, whether it be coaching or mastermind or professional development, where you're constantly focused on improving the way that you can provide service so that you can bring that top level value to your clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whenever I'm in a mastermind group, I never want to be the guy who's, first place, right? He's got
Right.
got the most experience, got the most, knowledge to bring to the table. I want to be that guy who can sit at the table with guys who've got decades and decades of experience in the field that I'm going into or I'm in already, and learn from those guys, right? And if you surround yourself by people who you want to be like, what's going to happen?
You're gonna, yeah. I mean, you kind of are the product of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, right?
Yeah,
Is the saying.
100%. I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's great to put yourself in rooms where you're the least experienced person. So I mean, that's what I'm looking forward to this weekend. Like, I know I'm going to be sitting at a table with 10 guys who have accomplished so much more in their careers than where I'm at. So it's going to be a humbling experience, but I'm just ready to soak in as much information as I can.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of these guys own billion-dollar companies,
Right.
They've seen it, they've done it, they've lost it, they've built it back,
Mm-hmm.
right? And those are the guys you want to learn from. So it'll be a good time. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Go a few times a year to this. And it's 6 guys.
Okay.
Table actually. So it's a pretty tight little group. It'll be really enjoyable. So what do we see? As far as this spring market in general. I mean, I'm telling you right now, it's heating up. At least for us, it's heating up like crazy.
Yeah.
It paused so drastically after the election.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you had Christmas, you had New Year's, you had the election, and what's that going to do is no one's going to be moving.
Snowstorm.
Snowstorms,
Right.
Yeah,
It actually did have an effect, believe it or not.
yeah, I know it had an effect. I mean, I was actually picking up some clients to go do some showings in my trucks, and I got a 4-wheel drive and the tires on it. It's not a big deal for me to drive around in the snow. And there was a few properties, that would have sold. Right.
Interesting.
Immediately. If that Snowmageddon hadn't came around, I was like, let's go pick that up. Okay.
Right.
Nobody else is able to get out there and do that showing. I've got no problem getting over there. I'm going to come pick you up. We're going to go be the only showing on that house and go get them an offer. Yeah.
Yeah. Clever.
Right. And
Clever.
so
That's awesome.
We got a few under contract that way, actually.
That's super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just hustling when other folks can't with 2-wheel drive.
Yeah. But yeah, I think you're right. I think there's been a couple different things that have kept some buyers on the sidelines, or maybe caused sellers to have hesitations about listing their house. I think that as we get into the spring market, we're going to see a lot of people re-entering who've maybe had their home search on pause for a while. I think that's really going to heat things up, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. It's going to be a pretty aggressive spring market.
Okay.
I'm preparing for that at least. I think we've had a lot of build up over the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
2024, we saw fewer home sales in the last 30 years, which is huge. But there's got to be a rebound from that.
Right. There's some pent up consumer demand, probably surrounding elevated interest rates. Now maybe consumers are realizing that elevated interest rates are probably here to stay for a little while, and so they're kind of getting over that. They're getting to the realization now that if they're going to purchase, they need to do it now.
Not just that. I mean, whenever there's an election year, the market always slows down.
Okay.
Big time. The world's not going to end. I'm pretty confident in that, but it can feel like it is to some folks, throughout that process. And so they're not considering making any huge life adjustments if the world's going to end. Right. The kind of, the concept, right? This looming thing.
Right. You got half the country waiting for somebody to step in and save them and make housing affordable. You got the other half waiting for chaos to happen and housing to become even less affordable and tank real estate prices. So a lot of people with anxiety on both sides of the aisle, maybe causing them not to make a move. Right.
Mm-hmm. History repeats itself. Ultimately, we can go into history and we can kind of say, oh, well, this happened at a similar time in history and these were the results. All right. So according to history, 2025 is going to be a good real estate market.
Okay. And looking at the past, what market does this remind you of that makes you think 2025 is going to be a busy year?
Yeah. So there's a few different markets ultimately. I mean, if you just look at the election cycles in general,
okay,
they're going to show a repeated, kind of precedence there in general. Think about, what was it, 2020? Right, we saw a huge influx. That was mostly because of interest rates. So we don't really want to look at that too much.
Right.
Looking at the kind of 2016 market and 2012 market, the 2012 market was still kind of built up from 2008.
Right,
in
rebounding.
some facets.
Mhm.
Now, if you look at the 2013 market, it boomed. Okay,
Interesting.
2013 was one of the best real estate markets that we saw in general.
Okay.
And so I would say that we're going to start seeing a little bit more of a upswing. All right, I think 2025 is going to be the start of that. And so we'll have a pretty strong market this year. And I think it's just going to keep getting better. Maybe I'm just a complete, optimist here. But
And when you say strong market, do you mean that sellers should expect to see, large amounts of appreciation, or that transaction volume is really going to go up?
I think transaction volume is going to go up.
Okay. That's where I see it as well. I kind of see modest appreciation, 3-4% maybe again, if we're ambitious, maybe 2.5.
Amounts of appreciation right now as an economy.
Right, right. So maybe not drastic spikes in home prices, but a lot more homes changing.
See a healthy appreciation of 3, 4, 5, 6% in different specific areas. We want to see a transaction amount going up, meaning people are feeling comfortable moving, and we don't necessarily want to see, property value keep shooting up the way it is. It's just, the affordability issue is going to just keep getting worse if that's the case. And so, that's kind of going back to, well, if interest rates came down, what would happen? Well, the market would go bananas again, and everybody would be moving because, now's the time to snag that low interest rate, get the free money, Well, you get all that aggression in the market, and all of a sudden property value shoots up.
Right.
And so if that happens and interest rates go back up again to stabilize it, well, you're paying $100,000 more for the same house with the same interest rate you have right now. So, where are we at? We're entering a pretty normalized market in general.
Okay.
Something where people should, if they really want to move, that and it's something that's gonna be better for their lives. Well, I'm sorry you're gonna have to get rid of that lower interest rate, but we're not gonna see much difference in where we're at right now. So you might as well move. But ultimately that has to be the right decision for them at the right time.
Right.
And you've had people who have not been moving because of that issue, right? Of having this super low.
Yeah, they feel trapped.
Right, they feel kind of trapped, and eventually people who are feeling trapped are gonna get kind of fed up with feeling trapped and make a move. So that's about to start rebounding pretty soon.
Right. Right. Talk to me about, you mentioned earlier in the podcast that we have a lack of supply. What do you see happening with supply in the next year, 2 years, 3 years? Think that housing starts are going to increase? Think that there's going to be more building of new construction that's going to have an effect on home affordability? Or do you kind of see continuation of, limited building and limiting supply? So
we're building more homes right now than we were a few years ago.
Okay.
We kind of realized what the issue was, and it was lack of inventory, and the economic factors had always been pointing towards that, but it really kind of came to fruition, and people started making moves on it. So I would say we're going to start seeing more development in general. That's going to look like a couple different things. A lot of folks are going to choose to rent opposed to own. And if that's the best thing for them, then to go do that, right? If they really don't want to be trapped or tied down, then that might be the best case scenario. Now, is owning real estate as an asset that's going to go up in value and eventually bring you more financial freedom? Absolutely. Now, is a primary residence, the home that you live in, unless you treat it like an asset, going to actually make a huge difference if you're going to be moving pretty quickly? No, if you're going to be moving in the first 3 to 4 years, you're going to be moving around. It might not be the best decision to actually buy a house, because if you're paying primarily interest on that, and if there's any repairs that pop up, you would have wished you rented.
Right. Right. When is a time when maybe somebody who's thinking about buying should consider renting instead of making a purchase?
So if they're thinking they're going to be moving within the next year to go to a different job, they're getting relocated for work, or maybe even 2 years, right? And there's a question mark around where they're going to be living, they should probably rent.
Okay.
They should either get a 6-month lease or a month-to-month lease in preparation for that. Now, if they want to buy that property as a primary residence and use it as a rental property going forward and make a move but hang on to it, then I suggest they do that instead, because they could hang on to it as a rental, get a lower down payment, get in the door, and then move to a different area. Now, that does also affect like their time. Okay.
Right.
It affects their time. So
buying a house is a lot of work.
Buying a house is a pretty fair amount of work. I like to think that we make it
as little work as possible.
But it is a fair amount of work in the whole scheme of things.
Moving at least is a lot of work.
Yeah, moving is a lot of work. Moving sucks. There's no way around it. But
that's the same if you're renting or if you're buying. Though,
yeah, you're moving. Regardless, you're moving. So ultimately, if they're keeping it as a rental property and they want to hire a property manager, I don't suggest they try to manage that property. Living in a different state. You're better off hiring a property manager, and you're likely not going to make a whole lot of money on that property for the next 5 years. You're buying it for a long-term investment ultimately. And so if they're willing to kind of bite the bullet on the fact that they're not going to get a whole lot of income off of that, but they want to buy it as an asset they're going to hang on to for a long time and then move to a different area, absolutely. Then that's the right decision to make. But if they don't want to have that time, constraint as far as finding the property and then dealing with the management of it, then it's probably a better decision to rent.
Makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a little bit of Midwest real estate for you today, and looking forward to catching you next week.